start letting everybody in. But I'm gonna share my screen first, hold on. Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. While we are waiting for some more people to log on, please go ahead and complete our first set of polls here. And we'll wait another minute and then we will get started. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 6th Wasteless Wednesday Social. I will be your MC for today's event. My name is Gregory Trites, and I am the Senior Waste Reduction and Recycling Coordinator for the Johns Hopkins University Homewood campus. Just to give you a little background on the series, if you haven't joined us yet, each week we're joined by a different sustainability professional to explore a topic related to waste. Our hosts will spend a couple minutes presenting a topic, and then we'll start posing questions to the group to get some ideas and feedback, some thoughts, just have a fun, nice discussion. If you're just joining us, please go ahead and complete those polling questions so we know a little bit about who's joining us today. While you're doing that, just kind of review some housekeeping things. This is being recorded, so if you do need to leave, I'll send it out later if you're curious. Please introduce yourself via the chat box if you'd like to. Share your name, what school, your organization you're from, or department you're within. And also feel free to unmute yourself at any point during the presentation or the conversation to share an opinion or a reference or resource. We want to make this social, so please, please, please feel comfortable unmuting yourself. Just keep yourself muted when you're not talking, just to be courteous and limit background noise. We are going to have one of our awesome students kind of keep an eye on the chat room and bring up anything that might be coming or happening in the chat room to the vocal conversation. If you're having any technical issues, you can always send me a message directly within the chat. That's to Brigid. So we're gonna get started today. We are going to have our host speaker today is going to be kind of a mashup of folks. So our main person is going to be Lyanna Howser, who is the Waste Reduction and Recycling Manager at Homewood. She works on to engage all members of the Johns Hopkins community to reduce the generation of waste and encourage the responsible reuse of recycling materials. Her career with Hopkins began in 2003, and she also received her master's in environmental science and policy from the JHU Advanced Academic Programs. So in addition to Leana, we are also going to be joined by our wonderful student employees, Mashiat, who is a rising sophomore from New York City. She is studying behavioral biology, and Yuan Wang, who is also a rising sophomore. She is from Diamond Bar, California, and currently pursuing a degree in international studies and public health. So I am going to hand over the reins to Leana, who will be leading our discussion on food waste. So exciting. I'm going to end the polling results and then share the results real quick so everybody can see who we got with us today. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Just looking at the sharing, at the poll results.
Yeah, the polling.
All right, so it looks like the majority of people want to know about both waste reduction at home and the university. So thank you, Brigid. And thank you all again for joining us on another Waste Less Wednesday. So this week we are going to talk about food waste. I'm assuming that this topic is near and dear to your hearts as it is to mine and Brigid's and Mashiat and UN. We've had lots of discussions and programs centered around reducing food waste at Hopkins. And as well, since we've all been at home, talking about how we can address that issue at home. Food waste may be a larger component of your waste stream since you've all been working from home. One of the things that we did as a team is do some at-home waste audits, and food waste was one of the things that I was able to sort of delve into at my home and look at what I could be composting and what I could be reducing. So we've all more than likely deepened our connection with food and more cognizant of our food waste now that we're at home. We're all eating more meals at home. Some of you may be still going into the office. Maybe you've taken up cooking or baking. I know that was really big at the beginning of the pandemic and everyone staying at home. Like everyone was sharing on Facebook and Instagram their new baking accomplishments. And maybe they weren't always so tasty or successful. So maybe there was a little bit more food waste. You're likely not eating out as much with restaurants being closed, but maybe you're ordering more takeout. So all of these new behaviors have a potential to lead to more food waste. Potential, not necessarily always, but so at the beginning of the pandemic, I created a video that we haven't shared yet with the public. So you guys get first viewing. But basically the video gives a basic overview of the problem of food waste, some of the key areas where food waste is generated, and some helpful tips for how we can reduce food waste at home. So we're going to share the video with you all. It's only like 6 minutes. And then afterwards, we can sort of dig into the challenges and opportunities to address the very big problem of wasted food. The video does just focus on at-home food waste, so we'll cover those issues and then try to leave some time towards the end for the waste issues at your university.
Okay. So I am now going to stream the video. There should not be an issue with lag during the video because there's no movement necessarily, but I am going to post the link into the chat room in case you'd like to watch it on your own computer instead.
Hi, welcome to Homewood Recycling's Say No to Wasted Food presentation. In this video, you'll learn where food is wasted in our food system and how you can reduce wasted food at home by storing food properly, prepping meals efficiently, and buying food responsibly. We hope this is helpful, and please enjoy. Did you know that 40% of all the food that is grown, processed, and transported in the U.S. is wasted? In fact, if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter after China and the United States. Current research tells us that 82% of wasted food occurs after it leaves the farm. 40% is wasted at retail locations like grocery stores and restaurants, while 42% is wasted in homes. The average American family of 4 spends $1,800 on food that we never eat. Why is so much food wasted? In grocery stores, it's complicated. First, there are date labels. Date labels are not federally regulated, and most indicate peak freshness, not safety. In fact, expiration dates are only federally mandated for infant formula. So just because something has a best if used by or sell by date, it is not necessarily unsafe to consume. Conveniently, manufacturers determine their own sell-by dates, so when those arbitrary dates expire, grocery stores must remove those items, throwing away food that is still good to eat. It can be donated, but we will get to that challenge in a second. What do you see when you walk into a typical grocery store? Mounds of fresh, bright produce of every variety stacked precariously on top of one another. Have you ever wondered what happens to the fruit on the bottom? What about the misshapen carrot or slightly bruised apple? Sadly, most of it gets thrown out to make room for fresher produce, because we as consumers want abundance, variety, and uniformity. We shop with our eyes, and grocery stores welcome us into this oasis of produce perfection. But is this expectation sustainable? The answer is no. Of course, grocery stores should donate all of this perfectly edible food rather than throw it away, right? Well, ideally, yes, but donation isn't easy or free. In order for a store to donate food, they need to have systems in place to safely handle and store food for donation, which requires space and labor. And they need reliable partners to donate to, which requires time and organization. That is not to say it isn't possible. Many grocery chains donate food, but it isn't as easy as you might think. And in the fast-paced world of retail, not all stores have the capacity or, sadly, the incentive to do so. Let's turn our attention to the positive things that we as consumers can do to reduce the 42% of wasted food that we are responsible for. First is storage. Not all produce is created equal, and so you can't just toss it all in the fridge and expect it to not rot. Rather than list storage tips from asparagus to zucchini, you should check out SaveTheFood.com. Created in 2016, this food waste reduction campaign is your one-stop shop for reducing wasted food. Next up is meal planning. I don't know about you, but sometimes the most unwelcome question in my house is, what's for dinner? Meal planning is stressful because it requires creativity and time, and at the end of a long workday, we don't always feel like Julia Childs. Well, one way to make meal planning efficient and reduce wasted food is to use recipe apps, like Epicurious. Pick a few ingredients in your fridge, type them into the search, and voila, your dinner dilemmas are solved. Or pick a meal that you want to make. Before you go shopping, enter some of the key ingredients into the app, and then plan your other meals around those ingredients. This is especially useful for things that come in larger quantities, but you only need a small amount. Also, did you ever think to shop for produce at the salad bar? If you know you'll never use that entire head of cabbage, why not grab only what you need from the salad bar and save the guilt of throwing away all the excess? Lastly, where you spend your money sends a signal to companies that you support what they do. So try to align your values with your shopping. Support grocery chains that actively practice food rescue and donation, or chains that intentionally keep realistic inventory. You'll see partially empty shelves or produce displayed in shipping boxes rather than more attractive displays that result in greater waste. We know that this can be a matter of privilege, as too many communities do not have a wealth of options when it comes to grocery stores, or necessarily access at all. Fortunately, farmers markets are being established in many communities, providing greater equity in food access. Buying directly from farmers also cuts down on waste in the supply chain. There are also so-called ugly produce delivery services. These companies buy produce that don't meet grocery chain aesthetic standards or are overstock. They then sell boxes of produce, usually by subscription. These companies are not free from criticism, but I think they do have their place in our toolbox of solutions to wasted food. The good news is the U.S. has set a goal to decrease wasted food by 50% by the year 2030. And even better news is you and many others are educating yourselves and taking action to reduce wasted food individually and at the national level through how you spend your money and who you elect. You may have noticed that we didn't talk about composting. While collecting food scraps for composting is definitely something we recommend, reducing wasted food is at the top of the food waste hierarchy. so we wanted to focus on reduction before recycling. Stay tuned for future videos about how to compost at home. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about how you can say no to wasted food. And please send any questions to recycling@jhu.edu and follow @Homewood Recycling on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, cool. Hopefully that was enjoyable. I spent way too much time listening to my own voice when I was recording that. Anyway, you know, it was a very brief overview, and there are certainly lots of specific areas where we can delve into. I'm gonna feel free to use the chat box if you have questions as we kind of go through some of the already pre-written questions, discussion questions that we have. I'm going to turn it to Mashiat, who's going to go through and sort of pose our discussion questions for the rest of the event.
Yeah, so the first question I wanted to pose is that, have your habits or routines around meal preparation, shopping, or food waste generation changed since the pandemic? And if so, how?
So for me, we're definitely using up our leftovers more than we used to. You know, it's a lot easier to repurpose your food when you have the time and the resources to be creative at lunch or dinner, particularly lunch, I would say. So since we're eating lunch at home, I'm using a lot more things that are stuck in the back of the fridge for lunch than I would have normally. So like in the morning when you're running out of the house to get to work, you just grab the first thing you can. I mean, that's if you're like me and you don't plan lunch the night before. So now I can stand in front of the fridge and pull through everything, pull everything out and kind of make combinations that I might not have normally done, make that salad dressing or some other thing to complement it, or have a stove or a toaster oven or things that I might not have at work, the time and the resources to be a little bit more creative. You know, without having the forethought in the early morning, I definitely have used repurposed leftovers a lot. Brigid?
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think the time has allowed us to have a lot more creativity when using leftovers. I think like when we've had leftovers, specifically like stuff that's plain, it's just given us a lot more time to like actually think and be conscious about what we're doing. But we, my husband and I are totally victims of a baked good gone bad, and some food waste from that. So I think, you know, it's a little bit of give and take there.
I'll also say that in the beginning, we really only joined the big box like BJ's Costco type thing when it opened up in our neighborhood, and it actually has a gas station that was convenient. So we live in a small row home, so we typically, like, other than toilet paper or something like that, like we just don't have the room to store a large amount of food. So we didn't really use BJ's a lot for our shopping needs, unless we were having like a big or block party or something like that. But when COVID-19 happened and everybody was freaking out about going out into public, my husband would go to BJ's and just buy like massive amounts of food so that we wouldn't have to go back out into public for like 2 weeks. And so that was like, it was fun because, you know, we had like a wealth of things and we froze a lot of things. So we didn't really waste things as much, but it certainly meant a lot more packaging because a lot of those places, everything comes in like packaging individual or like, you know, their produce and stuff as opposed to loose. You know, like we, you know, splurged a little bit on some of those, you know, pre-made things that you normally don't buy, you just stick in the toaster oven. So there was some of that. And we relied a lot on our Hungry Harvest subscription because we still had that, and that was a really great source of produce and stuff. But since there's less of a, I don't know, I wouldn't say that it still doesn't exist, the risk doesn't exist, but people have gotten a little bit more comfortable leaving their homes. So we are kind of going back to our old habits of going to the grocery store, maybe not every other day like we used to, but a lot more frequently, and buying smaller quantities of food. And I actually canceled or suspended my Hungry Harvest subscription so that I could go back to the farmer's market. I finally felt comfortable going back to the farmer's market, and that took a lot of time for me to do that. So our shopping habits have changed a lot and are starting to go back to pre-COVID.
So Julie said in the chat that she feels like it's hard to balance going to the store less and making sure the things you get are staying fresh. And I know my family has been using like those Whole Foods deliveries as well as Instacart. So I'm wondering, what are your experiences, like anyone in the audience, what are your experiences with that? And do you think that it does help reduce the amount of people who are in the grocery stores? And do you feel like the products you're getting are what you would normally get when you go to the grocery store?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I never thought of, you know, like Instacart or food delivery service as being like a benefit to other people by you not going to the store. I've always thought about, like, oh, it's a benefit for me because I don't have to go to the store and I don't have to expose myself. But that's a really great point, Ewan. I also wonder if it would cut down on food waste, because I feel personally when I do like Instacart or delivery, I'm not buying things that I don't necessarily need. Like, I'm only getting what I asked for initially. So it really cuts down on like some of the miscellaneous stuff. So I'd be very curious actually if that has an impact on food waste at all, directly in that way. I totally agree with what Julie said in the chat, because at the beginning of the pandemic, and even now, my husband and I, because only one of us is going to the grocery store and we have a baby, it's just very challenging when one of us is like gone for a while, and it usually is a long trip to do a grocery run. And so we buy a lot of stuff and a lot of produce. And so we will go and do like a Costco run like once a month and stock up on like some meat and dairy products and stuff like that. And we break it all down and freeze it all into like smaller packages so that it's more usable throughout a period of time. But we still have an issue with salad. All of our lettuce will go bad no matter what I try to do, no matter how much we eat it, it just always goes bad. And I'm seeing the chat room like light up. So what do we got on?
I would just add to that, in the video, one thing that I always was terrible at was storing produce. And you know, those drawers, there's like high, low humidity, you know, and like I try to put only vegetables in one and fruit in another. But there are lots of really cool ways to store there are lots of ways, not lots of ways, there are certain ways, very specific ways to store certain types of produce so that they don't go bad, or that they you can extend their life. So for instance, Brigid, to your point about salads, I started this prior to COVID when we did this food waste presentation at our Lunch and Learn like last fall. But my lettuce, whether it's the field greens that come in the bag or the box, or you know, the farmer's market, or a whole head of lettuce, you can wrap it in a damp towel and then put it in, I try to put it in like one of those big Glad containers. You could also use it as like a large Ziploc bag if you have those, but, and then I label it. So like I have this big Glad box, you know, container.
Yeah.
It's got the lettuce inside wrapped in the towel, like a dish towel. And then on the outside, it says lettuce. So like when I'm searching through, it's not in my crisper drawer. I'm searching through the shelves of my refrigerator, which are a disaster. And I can see it and I know it. And so like for me, a lot of times it's how things get stored, either improperly, like asparagus, you're supposed to store like it's a flower, like flowers in a vase. All of that is on savethefood.org or .com, whichever it is. But there's, you know, ways to store the food so that it lasts longer. But then also we know ourselves and we know what we need to make sure that we don't waste food. So, you know, making sure that you're putting it into the refrigerator in a way that you know where it is. And then lastly, I have started a dry erase board next to my refrigerator. And so when we would get our Hungry Harvest, we'd get all these produce and I would write all the produce down on the dry erase board on the refrigerator. Nice. And that way I knew it was in there even if I couldn't see it. And then I would just erase the things as we went through them. And it also helped visually for me when I was at the grocery store before this, but like, oh, what do we need? What do we have? And then going to that app and typing in like we have cabbage or kale or squash or whatever, and then helping kind of design meals around those items that are in the fridge.
I like it. I'm writing down notes.
Any other, you said the chat was blowing up?
Yeah, so Lisa said it's always a great idea to support local CSA or farmers markets and start planting your own produce at home. And I know a lot of friends who have started doing that. Actually, one friend started planting chives at home and they grew so quickly that she had to give chives to like 5 other friends just to as to not waste them. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I found that now, you know, if you're trying to reduce plastic packaging, like I'm terrible at growing produce.
Yeah.
That's what farmers do. They're way better at it. And I have a little backyard. And so I've tried to grow tomatoes. I've tried to grow radishes and I've failed mostly. So I leave that up to the farmers. But what I can grow, and almost anyone, whether you're in a city, balcony, yard, whatever, are herbs. So this year we committed hardcore to herbs. And it's nice because you can just go out and pick them as opposed to having to buy those little plastic packages, you know, that are super expensive. It's like $4 or $3 for a little thing of mint when mint will go insane in your backyard. So if you're not comfortable growing your own vegetables, I definitely suggest, like UN said, growing your own herbs.
Yeah. On the topic of plastic packaging, we also got a comment from Hannah who said that I used Instacart for a while. For me, I had problems with the amount of plastic used. They would individually package every produce item. So Leanna, I wanted to pose another question to you about food packaging. Do you think because of COVID, since we're staying at home using different online delivery systems or not, do you think we're generating more food packaging waste?
So I said, like, given some of the things about like repurposing food and some of the tips that I've integrated into my kitchen habits, I think my household is generating less food waste. And since we stopped going to beaches, and I've never used Instacart or Peapod or any of those home deliveries, I tried to, but they were so booked that I was like, all right, screw it. I'm just going to the grocery store and masking up, you know? But we are, so since we've gone back to buying produce that's not in the packaging like they do generally at BJ's and stuff, we have reduced our plastic packaging in that sense. But we also aren't going out to restaurants. So we had a pretty healthy restaurant habit prior to all this. I would say at least once a week. If not twice. My husband is a big foodie. He was a food critic. And so, you know, we love supporting all of our local restaurants in the city. So since we stopped doing that, I failed every time I tried to remember to bring a container with me to the restaurant. Like that's just not normalized yet. And I would forget. But we do still do takeout once a week. So every Friday is like our takeout night. And so that's something that sort of has stayed consistent. But I think definitely like not going to restaurants as much for us has reduced that packaging waste.
I think it's interesting that you say that because I kind of have the opposite where I feel like we used to only, anytime we did to go or anything before, and we really weren't eating out a lot anyway because we had the baby. But even before, we would get pizza or something, and it would just be in like a cardboard box. But now, you know, we will get to go from places because, you know, we're trying to support our local businesses. And it's all plastic packaging, and most of the time it's plastic packaging. So now, you know, I'm trying to keep whatever Tupperware containers I can, and go back to places that I know are using cardboard or compostable packaging. But it's been challenging because I think, yeah, that in some levels, some of my food packaging has reduced because I am making more meals at home on the whole. But it does seem like when I do get takeout, it's like, here's a whole new set of Tupperware containers.
So kind of returning to the video, because it did mention some steps and tips that you could take to reduce your food waste. So which of the mentioned tips do you think you would use in your own life that would help you towards reducing your food waste?
Definitely the food apps. I honestly have no idea. I mean, we have cookbooks, you know, and my husband loves, again, he's got a food background, so he will just read an entire cookbook from front to back, like it's a fiction, like, you know, novel. I am not, like, I'm a visual person, and it's easier for me to, you know, see it on there and then like copy and paste, or, you know, send it to a shopping list on my phone. And just to be able to search and, like, you know, cross-reference stuff. So I definitely, like, am obsessed and use religiously the food apps. So I, you know, not to necessarily promote any one company or in particular, but we actually paid for the New York Times food section subscription. It's in addition to the regular news for New York Times. So that's a big one that we use. And I always, before that, used Epicurious. And I just think, like, again, kind of going back to the tip in the video, what I like to do is buy, like say I have eggplant, and I put eggplant into the recipe, and I find a really great recipe that I want, but it also calls for, I don't know, like scallions and maybe an herb that I don't usually use a lot of, or you know, something, I'm blanking, but like, then what I do is I take those other ingredients that I need for the eggplant dish, and then I type that into the search. And then that comes up with another meal that I can make in that week to finish off the other ingredients that I might not otherwise use. And it's cheaper because you end up, like, buying fewer ingredients. And, you know, I just find it to be like a lifesaver and a food waste reducer.
I'm seeing a lot of activity on the chat, Ewan. Is there anything? Oh, Leanna, what is that app?
Epicurious is the name of the app. And I also, like I said, use the New York Times, but you have to pay extra. You have to buy a subscription for the newspaper online, and then you have to pay extra for the food part.
Yeah, so Betsy mentioned something called Buy Nothing. And do you want to elaborate on that, Betsy?
Sure. Buy Nothing is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's an app or not an app, sorry. It's a Facebook group, and there's all sorts of, it's a hyper-local group that you'll look for it in your specific neighborhood, and other people in your neighborhood who are also on it. You can just post saying, I'm not going to finish this lettuce, or this lettuce is starting to go bad. Does anybody want it for, you know, their animals or something like that? And then they will go and pick it up from you. So it's not just food that they do. It's anything and everything, but it's an economy-free system. So there's no money exchange. It's all about just, giving with gratitude. So
Yeah,
we're really worth checking out.
we have that. I'm a member of the Buy Nothing Baltimore group, and I never even either noticed or never thought about posting food on there. I actually was about to take some pictures of some things that I have after a basement clean out. I was going to post on there, but I've never seen it. I'll look out for that now.
Yeah, it's well worth, people in my neighborhood do it a lot. There's a lot of chickens and rabbits and that type of stuff. And a lot of people will be like, hey, this is starting to go bad. And so, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of other, it looks like, tips coming in here on like what other people do, like freezing stuff. I think I feel like your video is very comprehensive, but there's a couple other things that I feel like I do, like I mentioned, like freezing things, especially fruit and some produce when it's going to go bad, if I know I can make it into smoothies and things like that. I know we've talked a lot about like those reusable pouches and whether they're helpful or not helpful, depending on the kinds. But another thing that my husband and I really try to do is small batch cooking, which is sometimes hard, but sometimes also easy, depending on what you're making. And so like we try to make only enough for, a meal or two. So that way, if we're not feeling like we want to do leftovers 4 times this week or be creative, we're only creating a small amount. We're encouraged to consume it all.
Yeah, most recipes are either 4 to 6 servings.
Yeah.
So if you're a smaller household, and you're just you're willing to do the math and experiment a little bit, yeah, you can absolutely cut that recipe in half, and that's a really smart idea. I will say, in terms of freezing, we got into a bagel habit. My husband started making bagels. And I like everything bagels. And so I don't know what it is. It's just like a higher moisture content with all of the seeds and stuff on it. But I was finding that I couldn't get through, and I usually only eat half a bagel. If I do, I wasn't getting through these bagels fast enough. And so they were rotting, they were molding I had them in like a plastic bag. So I read somewhere that if you pre-slice the bagels and then freeze them, and then you just pull them out and put them in the toaster. I've done it like all week, and it's fantastic. So, yeah, I recommend.
That's a great tip. Yeah, because during the year, I've also ran into the same problem where my bagels will go bad within a week or two, and I don't have time to eat all of them.
Just cut them first. Same thing with bananas. Peel the bananas first.
Oh yeah, once I tried freezing an entire banana, and it did not work out.
Yeah, you could absolutely do that with baguette as well. My parents used to buy like 4 baguettes at a time, and I'm like, this is gonna go all bad. So we would put them in the freezer and then pull them out and just make garlic bread with them. So it's really easy to reuse.
Yeah. Now I will say, when we're talking about sustainability as a whole, and energy, climate change, greenhouse gases, I will admit that we have a second refrigerator in the basement, with a small freezer. And I was pushing for a freezer, like a chest, because we do freeze so much, and my husband makes a lot. And one of the things in the video, maybe we didn't talk about it, but in the presentation before I talked about is, making a big batch. Instead of a small batch of something, make a big batch of chili, and then, or something else, and then freeze it. But you have to have capacity in your freezer, which most freezers are either smaller than your fridge, or, barely the same size. So, freezing is a fantastic option, but it only works if you have room in your freezer. So I ended up losing on the battle for the freezer chest instead of the full fridge. So when we got a new fridge, we just moved the old fridge downstairs. And it's not as energy efficient, but I will say that I don't know what the life cycle comparison is for wasted food versus a refrigerator in the basement, but that refrigerator in the basement has saved so much food, whether it's the freezer or just moving it down into the fridge downstairs because our upstairs fridge was so packed. So, I mean, you know, freezing is great. I just want to acknowledge that it does mean that you, you have to have space.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Very true.
Yeah, these are awesome trips. And I know I just looked up Buy Nothing on my Facebook page and I didn't know we had one here. So definitely gonna use that. So are there any other strategies that we haven't talked about yet, or strategies that haven't been mentioned yet that you use at home to reduce your food waste?
I love Barbara's comment.
Dog, yeah, that was great. Let's see.
Fresh 20 meal plans for a family. That's good.
Coffee grounds to fertilize plants.
Yep.
And again, free feel to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the video is, you know, does touch on a lot of things, but again, like, you know, Brigid said, there's so many great tips that I think everyone has tried and tweaked or, you know, come to love.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You said about bananas, and you put them in the freezer without, with peeling them?
I
Is that true?
peel them, yeah, and then I just put them into a container. So I'll like peel a bunch of them that are starting to get brown, and then I put them in a container and then freeze them, and then just pull one out at a time. Or it's just,
And they don't get all mushy?
no. I mean, this is not for eating like fresh bananas.
Yeah, like baking.
Smoothies or baking, exactly. But unless you have, I never plan ahead. I am not a forward thinker. So when I want to make banana bread or I want to make a smoothie, if I pull the banana out and it's got the peel on it, then I found like you can cut it with a sharp knife and then it'll start to break apart in like strips. But it's freezing cold.
Right. And it's hard to peel.
That's the last thing you want to mess with. So I peel them first and then freeze them.
All right, I'm going to try that. Thanks.
I hope that my mistakes can help others avoid them.
So Jennifer asked, anyone found a way to freeze food in the freezer without Ziploc bags, but works just as well, especially for small quantities? In my house, we use small Tupperware, but you have to be careful because with like the freezer, sometimes the Tupperware ends up breaking because it's just so fragile after it's gotten really cold. And Susie said that she uses mason jars. They seal well. Yeah, I imagine that's a better option than using something that's made out of plastic.
Mason jars in the freezer?
Yes.
Wow.
I use glass, what is it, Pyrex? Like they make glass Pyrex. They're not Tupperware bowls, but like they're hefty duty glass containers.
Yeah, I use I use like plastic containers too. A lot of times if you get takeout food, that's what I'll use for the freezer. We have a roll of painter's tape in the drawer, our junk drawer, right next to our refrigerator. And that again, for me, has been a lifesaver, marking everything. Like even if it's going in the fridge, like that wrapped up, like my herbs, I'll wrap up. If I buy like parsley, I'll never be able to grow enough of in the backyard. So I do still buy parsley and cilantro in the big bunches. So like when I wrap that up in the towel, I label everything with the painter's tape. And same thing with our freezer, because once something goes into a container and it's in a frozen form, might just have to defrost and go, well, that's what we're eating tonight. So
yeah.
Yeah. Painter's tape is our friend. But Brigid, you use the silicone Ziplocs.
I do. We've used the silicone Ziplocs. We use it for mostly freezing like bulk fruits and stuff, and we'll use like tape and write something on the bag so we know what it is, because our silicone bags are colored. We've also used them for storing like chili and things, and it's worked out pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the time, and I just want to ask, maybe if you guys could show a thumbs up in the reactions, if you would like to give a thumbs up if you want to move on to the university institutional type food recovery and waste reduction, or just if you want to stay with the home stuff, don't do a thumbs up.
All right. Oh, there's thumbs ups. All right. We will,
Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4. I saw 4, 5.
They're kind of coming and going.
oh, because they disappear, Leanna.
Yeah. I tried to pay attention. I saw at least 6. Was there more?
Yeah, I think there was at least 6 or so.
Okay. Well, why don't we move on to the institutional questions, and then if there's a burning question about home waste, put it in the chat and we'll try to address it before, but I want to make sure we cover both topics.
Absolutely.
And feel free to keep going in the chat room about whatever tips and tricks. I love, like, somebody just mentioned, oh, chips go stale. Microwave them. That's great. I would have never thought about doing that.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We'll stick our tortilla chips back in the oven.
Yeah.
So the first question related to institution-wide waste reduction is that how do you think your food recovery efforts will be impacted when students return to campus this fall?
So, you know, the upside, I guess, is that we're going to have like no events. So events for us and probably most all of our institutions, it is a huge food waste generator. And so the fact that we won't have large scale events with food, I mean, Brigid manages our zero waste events program. And I mean, given like we have really busy periods, you know, like September, October, and April, May. And I mean, there are multiple events daily, and we don't do events at Hopkins without food. So you can imagine that that's a huge portion of the waste that we will not generate. So the sad thing is that we won't, we have a free food alert program that, you know, people can sign up for if they're Hopkins on the Homewood campus, and then they get a text or an email when there's an event that ends and has leftover food. So that turned out to be quite a useful resource, an important resource for people on campus who find themselves to be food insecure. So I imagine that during this time, like, you know, people who were food insecure or having financial problems to begin with, this is like even mounting and even more difficult. So, you know, we're not generating a lot of food waste, so we don't really have the food recovery tools that we don't need the food recovery. But, you know, it's kind of like a give and take.
Yeah. I'm curious about anybody else, you know, how does anybody else?
So Anna asked, yeah, how does free food alert work?
Great question, Anna.
So basically we have a website called freefood.johnshopkins.edu, I think is what it is. And you sign up if you have a JHU email address, and you just give your email and your phone number if you want text messages. And if you're an event planner, you can sign up to be an event creator. And at the end of your event, if you have leftover food, you can go to that same website and create an event. And then you just list the location, the type of food that you have, how many portions, give or take, you know, like 20 portions of pizza or whatever. And then how long the food is going to be available. And usually we say about 15 minutes. It's usually gone within 3 or 5 minutes, to be quite honest with you, but that just gives our custodial team and anybody else time to clean up after the event, so they're not like waiting around. But anyway, so then it goes out, email, text to everybody who's subscribed, and then you just run to the room and load up on whatever food is there.
So in the fall, obviously because of COVID, dining halls and cafeterias, they're inevitably going to change. And so with grab and go style food options that will be implemented, I'm guessing, at many, many institutions, how do you think our food waste will increase in that sense?
Well, I think this is actually a really great question for Mashia and UN and any other students on the call. You know, I think it depends on how well dining can assess how many people are going to eat. So, you know, dining has had their formula for the main student dining hall, and for the grab and go, you know, like for instance for us it would be like the fresh food cafe. There is food waste generated, but like they kind of know on a general day like how many people are going to eat chicken and how many people really like spaghetti, you know, so they can create, and they batch cook, right? So they probably have a pretty good idea of how they minimize their food waste as much as possible. But now they don't know how many people necessarily are going to be on campus exactly yet. And they don't know how many people are going to come and do grab and go. And once it's grab and go, like it's kind of done for, you know, like at least when they were batch cooking, like let's say they made too many, I know this is an example I use all the time. If they made a ton of chicken breasts for chicken sandwiches and they don't use them all, then they would then turn that into chicken soup or chicken salad or whatever. So they can repurpose those primary ingredients. But once they've made everything and they're putting it, and I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but my guess is that they're just going to package it all up into to-go containers and then just ship it out the door as people walk up. So once it's in a package, you can't take it back out and remake something new with it, right? So I think in that sense, it's going to depend highly on how well they gauge student usage. And then I don't know if that pre-packaged stuff gives us an opportunity to implement a food donation program. Because like it's hard right now, we don't donate outside of the community, outside of Hopkins. And so whether or not having things pre-packaged might help with instituting something like that. But my guess is the dining is going to be so overwhelmed that the last thing they want to do is take on a new project. And the last thing they want to do is they're already a little freaked out about liability. So during COVID, I don't think they're going to want to donate any food. But I'm curious for you, Masha, at UN, like, how do you think your food habits will be impacted? You know, you're a sophomore, so you're not living on campus, so you won't be required to have a dining plan. But do you think you'll utilize Hopkins dining, or will you?
So students who actually sign up through university housing right now, like sophomores, there is an option to sign up for university housing, which means that we will just be living under like apartments and hotels that the university has is contracted with. And if we sign up through that system, then we are going to be on a meal plan, which is quite interesting because some of these apartments are far from Homewood. So like 6+ miles. So I have no clue how we're going to come back on campus for the food. I mean, it just sounds like we won't be using our meal plan if we do live that far. But definitely going to be a lot less people utilizing the on-campus food options. And I'm also interested to see what the, like, aside from the FFC, what the other cafes that we pay for using dining dollars are going to do, since they have more options and their food is more like a la carte than a buffet style.
Yeah, I know that there has been some discussions on kind of creating local food sources rather than a central food dining hall, such as we had last year. So instead of all students having to come back to Homewood campus, perhaps at their designated apartments or hotel, wherever they're staying, there will be some kind of vendors or the hotel restaurant being able to cater to students. So meal plan would accommodate that. However, I do see how with grab and go, there is a lot more ways. I'm really used to going to the dining hall and eating with my friends. And even with that, I'm very conscious about like not using 2 plates when I can just use 1. So obviously those things I can't control anymore. But also on the other hand, because the whole student body will not be there, so inevitably they're producing less food or making less food, I suppose. So in that case, I think there is a bit of reduction of food production, but not necessarily food packaging. It's just a different source of waste now that we have to worry about.
Yeah, no, you guys bring up so many great points. I saw Sophie said like your university might have partnered with local restaurants. I wonder if that'll happen with like what Mashiat's mentioning, because 6 miles is a long way to go for the dining hall on campus if you've gone home at the end of the day. But you know, even to your point, Mashiat, you bring up an interesting point that because there is going to probably be a reduction of the number of students that would normally be on campus, potentially it's not going to be a food waste issue. It might be a packaging waste issue if we're talking about to-go stuff. And for us, all of our to-go packaging on campus is compostable. But then there's also the issue, and we're not really going to get into this, but I just want to mention it, about the supply chain issue, because we're not if the university's dining hall is not purchasing as much food to prep as it usually would have, there are farmers out there that have like produced or grown this food. You know, there are places that are producing food that is now not being consumed. And so there is food waste. It's just not seen maybe the way that we would normally be contributing to it. So it's just a weird year and scenario in general, you know?
Yeah, Brigid, you mentioned that before we started the call, that in the video, it talks about 40% of food is wasted, but 82% is retail and it's the consumer side, right? Yeah. So we may be, again, like you said, just shifting that percentage back to the farmers or the distributors. And I'm not exactly sure where the distributors fall. Yeah. I think the distributors are not part of the retail. So that sort of like, you know, pre-store, pre-restaurant. And so the food waste until everything kind of like, and then stores, and then that's the other thing is restaurants open, you know, yep. And then now they're closing down again.
Closing down, yep.
So like all of those supply chains started to pick back up. Then the signal gets sent to farmers or to distributors to ramp up production, and then it gets shut down again. I do know that in Baltimore, the Baltimore Food Waste Reduction Working Group was sharing a lot of resources to restaurants right before our governor shut down the state, to those restaurants to say, look, if you have, you know, food in your kitchens, it's going to go to waste. Here are all the places that it can be donated to.
Yeah. So
that if it's not something that can be stored on site for however long, we don't know, you know, please donate it. And, you know, you can imagine, like, I'm sure a lot of chefs and restaurant owners were, you know, felt terrible about wasting food, but they also were probably in a really awful position, you know, to like how to manage that along with all the other stresses that they were dealing with, knowing that their businesses were going to get shut down indefinitely. So it's very complicated. I think that, you know, kind of as we pose these questions, like whether it be at home, are we generating more waste? Are we seeing opportunities to reduce waste? It's, and then also with our institutions, there's so many, you know, I think many of us at home have sort of started to find our own groove again, and figured out how we're going to manage all of that stuff. At the institutional level, it's a very much wait and see, you know, like you may sign up for a dining plan, but how often do you use it or use it off site? Is dining basing their numbers off of the total number signed up, or, you know, there's probably going to be some waves of adjustment.
Yeah, I feel like we need to have like a recap of this in December or January and be like, okay, so what actually happened? Because this is like good forethinking. But I want to be cognizant of the time that we are at right now. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope you learned something new. I want to put out our ending polls for anybody who wants to give us some feedback about our discussion today. Thank you all for who shared things in the chat. These are really great resources, and I will be sure to, share all of these with everyone who is registered for our events. Join us, please, next week for a discussion on composting, which is something that we did not talk about specifically tonight because of the fact that, that we're going to be chatting about it next week. So we're going to be talking about composting specifically. Pamela is going to be talking about a compost farm that she takes her compost to personally that uses chickens for the composting. So just kind of an interesting way. We are also going to talk about composting in a couple weeks with Lisa from Princeton and a group from Princeton as well, and talk about composting and events. So if you don't join us for tomorrow's or next week's conversation about composting, you can still join us then. But yeah, thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. It's always a pleasure.
Yes.